The morning sun rose over Valora Prime like it did every day, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The colony was waking up. Shops were opening. Children were playing in the streets. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed safe. Day One stood at his post near the eastern gate watching the morning crowd. He was a human soldier, part of the Coalition Defense Force. Most days his job was boring. He checked identification cards. He smiled at families. He made sure everyone felt safe. That was the point of Valora Prime. It was supposed to be a place where different species could live together in peace. But something was wrong. Day One could feel it in the air. It started 2 weeks ago. A Velton family reported their cub missing. The little one had been playing in the garden one moment, gone the next. The parents searched everywhere. The security forces searched too. They found nothing. No footprints. No signs of struggle, nothing. Everyone thought it was just one scared child who wandered off. Children did that sometimes. They would find the cub soon, people said. But they did not find the cub. 3 days later, another child vanished. This time it was a creche infant, taken from her own home while her mother stepped into another room for just a minute. Then another disappeared, and another. Over 2 weeks, 15 cubs from different species went missing. 15 families were torn apart by grief and fear. Day One watched the colony change during those 2 weeks. The playgrounds became empty. Mothers held their children close, afraid to let them out of sight. Fathers walked the streets with weapons, protecting their homes. Different species started blaming each other. The Velton accused the creche. The creche suspected the Morvali. Old tensions that had been buried for years began to surface. The coalition military held meetings. They made plans. They formed search parties, but they found nothing. It was like the cubs had simply disappeared into thin air. The commanders were more worried about the colony falling apart than finding the missing children. They posted more guards in the streets. They tried to calm the angry crowds, but they were not looking for the cubs anymore. Day One could see it in their eyes. They had given up. Hannah, a human medic who worked at the colony medical center, found Day One during his lunch break. She sat down next to him without asking. Her face was tired. She had been working with the alien mothers, trying to help them cope with the loss. They are dying inside, Hannah said quietly. Not physically, but their spirits are breaking. You should see them, Day One. The Velton mother cannot stop crying. The creche mother sits in silence because her species cannot make tears, but you can see the pain in her eyes. They have given up hope. Day One said nothing. He just stared at his food. The commanders are not really looking anymore, Hannah continued. They think the cubs are dead, or sold to slavers far away. They think it is too late. I know, Day One said. Someone has to do something, Hannah whispered. Day One looked at her. What can anyone do? There are no clues. No trails to follow. The cubs just vanished. But even as he said it, something was bothering him. Something he had noticed 3 days ago during his patrol. He had been checking the outer sectors, the rocky areas where few people went. His scanner had picked up strange energy readings. They were faint, barely there, but they reminded him of something. Cloaking technology, the kind that pirates used to hide their ships. He had reported it to his commanding officer. The man had barely looked at the data before dismissing it. Sensor error, the commander had said. Those old scanners are always acting up in the rock formations. We have more important things to worry about than ghost readings. But Day One could not stop thinking about it. What if it was not a sensor error? What if someone was using cloaking technology near the colony? What if the cubs had not vanished into thin air, but had been taken by someone who knew how to hide their tracks? That night, Day One could not sleep. He lay in his small quarters, staring at the ceiling. He kept seeing the faces of the mothers, the way they looked when they walked through the colony, their eyes empty and hollow. He thought about the cubs wherever they were. Were they scared? Were they crying for their mothers? Were they even still alive? The coalition had rules, strict rules. A soldier could not just leave his post, could not take military equipment for personal missions, could not go beyond coalition space without orders. If he went after the cubs alone, he would be breaking every rule in the book. They would court-martial him. They might even throw him in prison, but if he did nothing, those cubs would never come home. Day One got up and walked to his computer. He pulled up the sensor data from his patrol. He studied the energy signatures, comparing them to known cloaking patterns in the database. The more he looked, the more certain he became. This was not a sensor error. Someone had been there hiding in the rocks watching the colony. He traced the faint energy trail on his map. It led away from Valora Prime out toward the edge of Coalition space. Beyond that was the Shroud Nebula, a dangerous region where the law did not reach. Pirates, smugglers, and slavers operated there freely. If someone had taken the Cubs, that was where they would go. Day-Wan made his decision. He began planning carefully. He would need a small ship, something fast and hard to detect. He would need weapons, supplies, and medical equipment. He would need to leave without anyone noticing until he was too far away to be called back. He worked through the night preparing everything. He filed false reports saying he was taking personal leave. He requisitioned a reconnaissance ship for a routine patrol mission. He packed his gear quietly, taking only what he could carry. Just before dawn, Hana appeared at his door. She looked at his packed equipment and the ship requisition on his screen. She understood immediately. "You are going after them," she said. It was not a question. "Yes. Let me come with you." "No. Day-One, you cannot do this alone. You will need help." He shook his head. "Someone needs to stay here. If I do not come back, someone needs to tell the mothers that I tried. Someone needs to take care of them." Hana's eyes filled with tears, but she did not argue. She knew he was right. "Promise me you will come back," she said. "I promise I will try." She hugged him tightly. "Bring them home. All of them." "I will." As the sun rose over Valora Prime, Day-Wan boarded his small ship. He took one last look at the colony, at the empty playgrounds and the grieving families. Then he launched into the sky, following a faint energy trail that might lead nowhere. But he had to try. Those cubs deserved someone who would not give up on them. Those mothers deserved to see their children again. Even if the odds were impossible. Even if he was just one soldier against whatever waited for him out there. He set course for the Shroud Nebula and left Valora Prime behind. While Hana slept peacefully in the garden with 3 cubs curled against her, the Grand Palace was in chaos. Captain Wu-Jin of the Shadowclaw Guard stood in the empty nursery, staring at 3 small beds. His hands were shaking. Behind him, 6 of his best warriors searched every corner of the room for the 3rd time, but they all knew the truth. The royal cubs were gone. "Captain," said Lieutenant Jihoon, his voice tight with fear, "we've searched the entire wing. They're not here." Wu-Jin closed his eyes. This was his worst nightmare. 3 months ago, he had been given the greatest honor of his life, to protect the royal cubs after their parents died in battle. For 3 months, he had devoted every moment to keeping them safe, and now they were missing. "Seal the palace," Wu-Jin ordered. His voice was steady, but inside he was screaming. "No one enters or leaves. Search every room, every corridor, every closet. Find them." The warriors saluted and ran from the room. Wu-Jin stood alone in the silence. He knew what would happen if the cubs were harmed. The Shadowclaw Guard would be executed, all of them. It was the law, but that wasn't what scared him most. What scared him was the thought of those 3 small cubs, frightened and alone somewhere in the massive palace. He had failed them. Private Minho ran through the East Wing, checking every room. He was the youngest member of the Guard, barely 20 cycles old. This was his first important assignment, and it was turning into a disaster. The storm outside was getting worse. Lightning lit up the windows and thunder shook the walls. Minho thought about the cubs and felt sick. They were terrified of storms. Every night for the past 3 months they had cried when it rained. That was the worst part. The crying. Every single night since their parents died, the cubs cried. They cried for hours. Nothing the Guard did could comfort them. Wu-Jin had tried everything. He'd brought them toys, special food, and soft blankets. He'd assigned warriors to stay with them at all times. Nothing worked. The cubs would look at the warriors with those big, sad eyes and cry, and the warriors, trained to face any enemy without fear, stood helpless. They didn't know how to stop the crying. They didn't know how to make the cubs feel safe. It was breaking them all apart. Minho checked the library, the storage rooms, and the meditation hall. Nothing. He was about to move to the next section when he heard Commander Raka's voice echoing through the corridor. "Find them now!" Minho ran faster. In the command center, Commander Raka was watching screens that showed different parts of the palace. Every available warrior was searching. They had been searching for 2 hours. Raka's claws dug into the edge of the table. He had sent a message to the High Council, informing them of the situation. They would arrive at dawn to pass judgment. If the cubs weren't found safe by then, the entire Shadowclaw Guard would face execution. That was the law. The cubs were the future of the royal line. Their safety was more important than anything. But Raka wasn't thinking about the law. He was thinking about Wu Jin. Wu Jin was the best warrior Raka had ever trained. Strong, honorable, and completely dedicated. When the cubs' parents died, Wu Jin had volunteered to lead their guard. He had sworn to protect them with his life, and now he would die because of this failure. Raka slammed his fist on the table. On one of the screens he could see Wu Jin searching the gardens. Even from here, Raka could see his former student was barely holding himself together. Captain Wu Jin moved through the rain, checking behind every plant and statue in the main gardens. His fur was soaked, water dripped into his eyes. He didn't care. Behind him, Lieutenant Ji-hoon was searching the western section. Ji-hoon was his oldest friend. They had trained together as cubs. Ji-hoon had 3 cubs of his own. He understood what it meant to protect the young. Wu Jin, Ji-hoon called out. The Eastern Garden. Have we checked there? Wu Jin's ears went up. The Eastern Garden. It was small, rarely used. The cubs liked to play there sometimes because it was quiet. With me, Wu Jin said, and they ran. They reached the door to the Eastern Garden just as Private Minho arrived from the other direction. All 3 warriors stopped at the entrance. I'll search it, Minho said quickly. He was the youngest. If something bad had happened to the cubs, it should be him who found them first. Not his captain, Wu Jin nodded. Minho took a deep breath and stepped into the garden. The rain had stopped, but water dripped from the glowing plants. Minho walked slowly, looking behind every bush. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Then he saw the stone bench in the corner. And under it, in the shadows, he saw something that made him freeze in place. A human. The human diplomat, Lee Hana. She was sleeping under the bench, sitting with her back against the wall and in her arms. Curled against her chest and sides were all 3 royal cubs. Minho couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. His mind was trying to understand what he was seeing, but it didn't make sense. The cubs were sleeping. Not crying. Not scared. Just sleeping peacefully against the human, making soft purring sounds. One of them, little Sola, had her tiny paw resting on Hana's hand. This was impossible. Outsiders weren't allowed near the cubs. It was forbidden. Touching the cubs without permission was a crime punishable by death. And yet here was this human. This soft, weak human that Commander Raka had mocked. Sleeping with the royal cubs like it was the most natural thing in the world. Minho's hands were shaking as he pressed the emergency signal on his communicator. Within seconds, Captain Wu Jin and Lieutenant Ji-hoon burst into the garden. They stopped when they saw what Minho was staring at. Wu Jin felt his heart drop into his stomach. Relief that the cubs were safe crashed into horror at what this meant. An outsider had touched the sacred cubs. The law was clear. This human would be executed, and the guard who had failed to protect the cubs from this contact would be executed too. Call Commander Raka, Wu Jin said quietly. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Call everyone. Within minutes, the Eastern Garden was surrounded by warriors. They stood in a circle, weapons drawn, staring at the sleeping human and cubs. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. Commander Raka arrived and pushed through the crowd. He looked at the scene and went completely still. The cubs were sleeping. Actually sleeping. He had seen them every day for 3 months, and they had never looked this peaceful. Tareen, the oldest cub, was curled against the human side. Kiva, the middle cub, had her head on the human's leg, and Sola, the smallest, was tucked under the human's jacket, barely visible. They looked comfortable, safe, happy. Raka felt something cold settle in his chest. By law, he should kill the human right now. She had broken the most sacred rule of Velkuri culture. But if he woke her, if he pulled her away from the cubs, they would wake too, and they would start crying again. He couldn't do it. For the first time in his long career, Commander Raka didn't know what to do. Captain Wu Jin, he said finally. Explain this. Wu Jin stepped forward. His face was blank, but his hands were clenched into fists. I cannot, Commander. We were searching for the cubs. Private Minho found them here with the human. I don't know how long they've been here or how this happened. Raka looked at the cubs again. Taran made a soft sound in his sleep and pressed closer to Hana. The human mumbled something and her arm tightened around the cub, gentle and protective. Even in sleep, she was keeping them safe. She doesn't know, Lieutenant Ji-hoon said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. The human. She doesn't know our laws. She doesn't know what she's done. It was true. Hana had arrived only 3 days ago. No one had told her about the cubs or the rules surrounding them. She probably had no idea these were the royal cubs or that touching them was forbidden. She had just seen cubs in a storm and done what came naturally to her species. She had comforted them, and the cubs who had cried every night for 3 months, who had refused comfort from the best warriors in the Shadowclaw Guard, had stopped crying for her. Captain Wu Jin stared at the sleeping human. Something was building in his chest, something hot and painful. He had spent 3 months trying to help those cubs. He had stayed awake night after night listening to them cry, feeling more helpless with each passing day. His warriors had suffered with him, all of them slowly breaking under the weight of their failure. And this human, this stranger, had succeeded where they all had failed. In one night she had done what they couldn't do in 3 months. The hot feeling in his chest grew stronger. His eyes started to burn. No, he thought. No, not now. Not here, but he couldn't stop it. For the first time since he was a cub himself, Captain Wu Jin felt tears forming in his eyes. The chaos in the assembly chamber was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Delegates from 100 worlds pushed and shoved trying to reach the exits. The translator network couldn't keep up with all the screaming in different languages. Guards rushed in from every entrance, weapons ready but unsure where to point them. Kreshinar stood in the upper level, his rifle still raised. He had done it. He had shown everyone that humans would respond with violence, just as Commander Veltok had predicted. Any moment now, the human security officer would start shooting. The other humans would attack. They would prove themselves dangerous, and the assembly would have to reject them, maybe even quarantine Earth to protect the galaxy. But something was wrong. The human soldier, Taemin, had his weapon drawn, yes, but he wasn't firing. He was pushing through the crowd, trying to reach the ambassador's fallen body, and the human scientist Heejin was frozen in place, her arms outstretched toward the children, who were walking away from her. Walking toward the center of the chamber, Kreshinar's rifle wavered. Why weren't they running? Why weren't they crying? Human juveniles were supposed to be weak, helpless. They should be terrified. But these 3 small humans walked with steady, deliberate steps, not rushing, not panicking. Just walking, Young Soo led the way. His hand gripped Nari's tightly. She gripped Daewon's. They moved through the chaos like an island of calm in a storm. Aliens stumbled away from them, too shocked to understand what they were seeing. Taemin finally reached Jiwoo. She was breathing, conscious but in pain. The plasma bolt had hit her shoulder, burning through the uniform and into flesh. Medical training took over. He applied pressure to the wound, called for help, scanned for additional threats. But part of his attention was on the children. What were they doing? The kids, Jiwoo gasped. Taemin. The kid, I see them, he said, torn between 2 duties. Protect the ambassador. Protect the children. He couldn't do both. Yijin finally broke free of her shock and ran after the children. Young Soo. Nari! Day 1! Come back! They heard her. Young Soo glanced back over his shoulder. But he didn't stop walking. None of them did. Station security was trying to lock down the shooter. Voth guards had surrounded Kreshinar, demanding he drop his weapon. But he was one of their own, one of Commander Veltok's personal unit. They hesitated, unsure of their authority, unsure of what was really happening. The children reached the center of the chamber where Jiwoo had been standing. They looked at the blood on the platform. Then they looked up at the upper levels where Kreshinar stood, and they began to walk up the stairs toward him. The assembly grew quieter. Not silent, that was impossible with so many different species in panic, but quieter. Because everyone slowly was noticing the children, noticing what they were doing. Stop them, Commander Veltok shouted. Someone stop those human juveniles. But nobody moved. Guards stood frozen. Delegates stared. Even the ones trying to flee slowed down to watch. Heejin reached the stairs behind the children. Please, she begged. Please come back. It's not safe. Ambassador Jiwoo is hurt, Young Soo said without turning around. His voice was steady but tears ran down his face. We have to know why. You can't, you're children, you have to let the adults handle this. No, Nari said simply. She was crying too. So was Day One, but they kept climbing the stairs. The upper level where Kreshnar stood was meant for high-ranking delegates. It had a better view of the central platform, but wasn't designed for children to reach. The stairs were steep, but the three humans climbed them with focus, helping each other over the tall steps. Kreshnar backed away from the edge of the level. His rifle pointed at the children now. "Stay back.
I will fire."
I am authorized to defend against threats. Young Su stopped on a step about 3 meters below Kreshnar. Nari and Day One flanked him 1 step behind. They formed a small triangle, looking up at the Voth soldier. Taemin had positioned himself with his rifle aimed at Kreshnar. 1 shot, that's all it would take, but the children were in the line of fire. If Kreshnar fired again, if anyone fired, the plasma bolts might hit the kids. He held position, barely breathing, watching for any chance to end this without more bloodshed. "Why did you hurt her?" Young Su asked. His voice carried through the chamber. The translation network picked it up, sent it to every device, made sure every species heard his question. Kreshnar's rifle shook in his hands. You should not be here. You should have run. You should have shown your true nature, violence, revenge, chaos. That is what humans do. But we didn't, Nari said. We're here. We just want to understand. There is nothing to understand. Kreshnar hissed. Your species is a threat to order. Commander Veltok explained it. Humans are unpredictable. They change too fast. They do things that don't make sense. You threaten everything we have built. Daewon tilted his head, studying the Voth soldier. So you hurt Ambassador Jiwoo because you're scared of us? I'm not scared. The rifle swung toward Daewon. I am a warrior of the Voth Collective. I fear nothing. My teacher says that scared people do scary things, Young Su said softly. She says that when someone is mean or does something bad, it's usually because they're afraid. Are you afraid of us? The question was so simple, so direct, so completely without anger or accusation. It cut through every defense Kreshnar had prepared. In Voth culture, strength was everything. Admitting fear was admitting weakness. Warriors who showed weakness were cast out, dishonored. Kreshnar had been trained since hatching to never ever acknowledge fear. But these human children, these small vulnerable creatures, they weren't accusing him of weakness. They were trying to understand. Their eyes held no judgment, only curiosity, only confusion about why someone would hurt another person. You don't understand, Kreshnar said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Your species threatens the balance. Your ambassador spoke of change, of growth, of questioning. These things destabilize societies. They make others question their own ways. You are a virus of ideas. But don't ideas help people get better? Nari asked. When we learn new things at school, we get smarter. Is that bad? It's dangerous when it happens too fast, when it spreads to those who should not question. Young Su took another step up, then another. He was now less than 2 meters from Kreshnar's rifle. Taemin's finger tightened on his trigger, ready to fire the instant he had a clear shot. But the boy was too close to the alien now. Any shot might hit him too. Don't come closer. Kreshnar backed against the wall. I will fire! You already did, Young Su said. You hurt someone we care about. Someone who was just talking, just trying to make friends. His voice cracked. Why would you hurt someone who just wanted to be friends? Something in Kreshnar's chest, where his multiple hearts beat in the Voth pattern, felt strange, tight, painful. This human child stood before him, crying but not running. Sad but not hateful, asking questions as if the answers mattered more than revenge. This was wrong. This wasn't how victims were supposed to act. They should want him dead. They should attack or flee. Those were the only logical responses to violence. Nari climbed up beside Young Su. Don't you want friends? She asked. Friends are nice. They make you feel better when you're sad. The rifle began to lower. Kreshnar didn't mean to do it. His training screamed at him to maintain his weapon position. But his arms were suddenly heavy. His hands shook. Daewon joined the other two. Now all 3 children stood before the soldier, looking up at him with tear-stained faces and confused eyes. My mom says everyone needs somebody, Daewon said. Even people who do bad things. She says that's why they do bad things sometimes, because they feel alone and don't know how to ask for help. The weapon fell from Kreshnar's hands. It clattered on the floor. He stared at the 3 small humans and something inside him broke. In Voth culture, warriors didn't cry. They didn't feel regret. Strength meant pushing forward without doubt. But Kreshnar felt something he had no words for. It was like drowning, but in air, like being crushed, but by nothing physical. He sank to his knees. His hands covered his face, and a sound came from his throat. A keening wail that the translator couldn't convert because the Voth language had no word for what he was feeling. Shame. Not from weakness, not from failure, but shame from seeing his own cruelty reflected in the innocent confusion of children who still believed the universe should make sense. The children didn't touch him. They stood there waiting, not celebrating his surrender, not gloating, just waiting to see if he could answer their questions. Young Su spoke again, his voice gentle. It's okay to be scared. We're scared too. This place is new and strange and we don't understand everything. But Ambassador Jiwoo said that's why we should talk to each other, so we can stop being scared together. The entire assembly watched in absolute silence. Recording devices captured every moment, broadcasting it across the station and beyond, to ships in orbit, to relay stations, to worlds across the galaxy. A human ambassador lay bleeding. A Voth soldier knelt disarmed, and 3 human children stood between them, crying but calm, asking why someone would choose violence over words. Tae-min finally reached the upper level. He kicked Kreshinar's rifle away and secured the soldier's hands. But his movements were mechanical. His mind was still trying to process what his eyes had seen. The Vrex soldiers stepped out of their gunships with weapons ready but lowered. They expected no real threat. Before them stood only 14 human children, the oldest barely 11 years old. Small prey, weak prey, easy to capture. The lead soldier was named Thexan, a veteran of 20 campaigns. He had hunted countless species across the galaxy. He saw the children clustered around the body of the dead human female and understood immediately. Cubs protecting their fallen mother. It was almost sad in its futility. Surrender, Thexan said through his translator. You will not be harmed if you cooperate. Mireille stood in front of the group holding the rifle. It was nearly as long as she was tall. Her arms shook slightly from the weight, but her aim did not waver. The weapon pointed directly at Thexan's head. Run, she repeated. Thexan laughed. The sound was like stones grinding together. Small human.
You are 10 years old.
Maybe 11. You have never killed. I have seen your files. You are a scared child who has lost her family. Put down the weapon before someone gets hurt. Mireille pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt caught Thexan in the chest. His armor absorbed most of the impact, but the force threw him backward. He hit the ground, stunned. The other Vrex soldiers froze in shock. The small human had actually fired. She had actually hurt their commander. That single moment of hesitation was all the children needed. They scattered like birds fleeing a predator, but unlike birds, they did not flee in panic. They moved with purpose, following patterns Jiwoo had drilled into them during countless training sessions. Split up, make multiple targets, use the terrain. Never bunch together where one shot can take many. Doyun grabbed Yoonji's hand and ran toward the tree line. Behind him, Kwan and Bora went the opposite direction. The group split into pairs, each team moving according to the plan they had rehearsed but hoped never to use. The Vrex recovered and gave chase. They set their weapons to stun and fired at the fleeing children. Green bolts of energy tore through the air. Most missed. Trees exploded. Ground erupted in fountains of dirt. But the children were small and fast and knew how to use cover. Mireille fired twice more, forcing the Vrex to take cover themselves. Then she ran, the rifle bouncing against her shoulder. She headed for the thickest part of the forest where the trees grew close together. Too close for the large Vrex soldiers to move easily. Do not kill them, Thexan roared at his troops. The commander wants them alive. Use stunners only. This was the children's first advantage. The Vrex could not use lethal force. They had to be careful, had to aim precisely. Children had no such restriction. If they had a shot, any shot, they took it. Doyun and Yoonji reached a small ravine and jumped down, sliding through mud and wet leaves. At the bottom, they found what they were looking for. One of the supply caches Jiwoo had made them prepare days ago, just in case. Buried under rocks and branches were emergency supplies, food, water, and something else, explosives. Small ones meant for mining or clearing obstacles. Jiwoo had taught them how these worked. How a simple timer and trigger could turn a tool into a weapon. Can you do it? Yoonji asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm for a 6-year-old who should be crying in fear. Doyen's hand shook as he pulled out the small charges. I think so. You remember what she taught us? Yes, we bury them here. They follow. We trigger from distance. It was a simple trap. Crude, but effective if the enemy was arrogant enough to chase small children through unknown terrain without caution. Above them, Vrek soldiers crashed through the undergrowth. They were tracking the children using heat sensors and movement detectors. Technology against desperation. The Vrek should have won easily, but they had never fought human children before. They did not understand what loss and grief could forge. Mireille found her position in the trees. Jiwoo had shown her this trick during training. Human children could climb easily, could hide in branches where larger beings could not reach. She wedged herself against a trunk and aimed the rifle down. 3 Vrek soldiers passed beneath her. They were scanning the ground following tracks. None of them looked up. Ambush predators looked up. Prey looked down. The Vreks had spent so long being the hunters that they forgot others could hunt them. Mireille fired once. The plasma bolt hit a soldier in the back of his neck where armor was weakest. He went down hard. The other 2 spun around, searching for the shooter. They never thought to look above. Mireille fired again. And again. By the time they figured out her position, she was already climbing down the far side of the tree and running to her next position. The Vreks were learning to fear. In the ravine, Do-Yoon heard the soldiers approaching. He and Yoonji had finished setting the trap. They crouched behind rocks 50 meters away, holding the detonator trigger. It was a simple device, just a button connected by wire to the buried explosives. Wait, Yoonji whispered. Let them get close. 5 Vrek soldiers appeared at the top of the ravine. They saw the small footprints leading down into the mud. They started to descend, weapons ready, confident they had cornered their prey. Doyen pressed the button. The explosion was not large. Not like the bombs that had destroyed cities during the war, but in the confined space of the ravine it was devastating. Rocks and dirt and shrapnel filled the air. The screams of Vrek soldiers echoed through the forest. When the dust settled, 3 soldiers were down. The other 2 retreated, calling for backup, reporting that the human children were armed and dangerous. That they were using tactics. That this was not a simple hunt anymore. Dexun received the reports with growing anger. His chest still ached from the plasma shot. His pride ached worse. They were losing to children. It was impossible. It was humiliating. Regroup, he ordered. We hunt them as a single unit. No more splitting up. We use overwhelming force. 12 Vrek soldiers gathered in the clearing where Jiwoo's body lay. They formed a tight formation covering each other, moving with military precision. They would show these human cubs what real warriors looked like, but when they reached the position where Mireille had fired from the trees, they found it empty. When they followed the tracks to the ravine, they found it had been abandoned. The children were gone, vanished into the alien forest like ghosts. What the Vreks did not realize was that the children had not fled. They had regrouped. Mireille had gathered them at a predetermined rally point, another lesson from Jiwoo. When your enemy is stronger, you do not meet them head-on. You pick them apart. You make them afraid. We hurt them, Mireille told the group as they huddled in a shallow cave. But they are still many. We are few. We need a better plan. We need help, Quan said. The distress beacon is still broadcasting. Maybe other humans heard it. Maybe, Mireille agreed. But help is days away. We have to survive until then. We could go to the main caves, Bora suggested. Hide deep where they cannot find us, Doyen shook his head. They will find us eventually. They have technology, sensors. If we hide, we only delay. Then what do we do? Someone asked. Yoonji spoke up. Her voice was soft but steady. We do what Mama Jiwoo did. We buy time, but not with hiding, with fighting. We make them afraid to hunt us. The children looked at each other. They were exhausted, scared. 3 of them were injured from near misses by Vrek's weapons, but in their eyes burned something fierce, something that had been forged in fire and loss. How? Mireille asked. Yoonji pointed at the rifle. We have 1 gun, but we have 14 minds. Mama Jiwoo said humans are dangerous not because we are strong, because we think, we plan. We are clever even when we are small. She was right. Jiwoo had taught them this, had drilled it into them over months of training. Humans were not the fastest or strongest species, but they were adaptable. They were creative. They could turn anything into a weapon if they were desperate enough. Over the next hour, 14 children planned their war. They used the forest itself as a weapon. They rigged trees to fall across paths. They covered pits with leaves, turning the ground into a trap. They used their small size to create passages through the undergrowth that the large Vrex could not follow. They studied the enemy's patterns, learned that Vrex soldiers moved in groups of 4, that they communicated using short-range radios, that they were disciplined but not creative, following orders without adapting to new situations, and they learned to use fear. When the Vrex search party found another supply cache, they opened it carefully, expecting traps. Instead, they found a message written in their own language. It said, "Run." The psychological warfare began. Mireille would fire the rifle from concealment, not to kill but to wound, to make the Vrex dive for cover, to make them nervous. Then she would disappear before they could respond. Doyen and Unji would leave false trails leading to more traps. Simple things. Rocks that triggered when disturbed. Branches bent back like springs to strike at face height for the tall Vrex. Quan and Bora became the hunters. They would follow Vrex patrols and throw rocks to create sounds in different directions, make the enemy think they were surrounded, make them paranoid. By nightfall, the Vrex had lost 7 soldiers. Not all were dead, but all were injured, and all were afraid. They had come to hunt children and found themselves being hunted instead. Thexan called for reinforcements. His pride would not admit defeat to cubs, but his survival instinct knew they needed help. 2 more gunships arrived, carrying another 20 soldiers. The children heard the ships.